All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, do we ever get to a point where the news cycle stops? I
Mhm.
mean, really, really.
No, I mean it's great. Like people joked about the first Trump administration being just this endless supply of material for comedians. And I
Right.
feel like this administration is endless supply for
Mhm,
podcasters who are talking about current events, politics, diversity and equity and inclusion and such. So
mhm.
yeah, there's a lot.
Never stops. It never stops. Exactly. So, oh goodness. And I try to keep my finger on the pulse of a number of different news outlets.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I wonder, is this one reporting from that planet and this one from another? Because I just saw something
Right.
and neither of these is overlapping. So here we are.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Hmm.
it's truly hard to turn it off sometimes, but here we are. But you're right. We've got a lot to talk about today. So, oh, tell us about the word of the week for this week.
Yeah, so it's probably another concept, and it's connected to what we talked about last week with the list of words that are being slowly removed or less used, I guess. And so we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to think about this concept of identity erasure. So that probably makes a lot of sense to people. Identity erasure, I probably don't need to define that for you, but I want you to think about it in the context of our current climate and the ways in which policies, practice, behaviors, um, book banning, word removal, right, contributes to identity erasure. So it would be the systematic removal or omission of specific identities, cultures, histories from public discourse. So that's the piece that I think we, as folks in this work, as resistors, as allies, need to remember that it isn't just, well, this book isn't going to be in the library anymore, or we're not going to put these words in grant applications. That
Mm-hmm.
with those decisions, slowly but surely, people's identities are erased. And obviously,
Mm-hmm.
the clearest example of that is the declaration that
Mm-hmm.
transgender or a person who is transgender is not an identity that exists, right? And so there, with
Mm-hmm.
one fell swoop, you have just erased an entire group of people. So, but I think it's happening a little bit more. What's the word I'm looking for when it's slow and kind of under the radar? Like,
Covert versus
yeah, yeah.
overt.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
covert's one of it. It's that, right? Like, I think you're going to wake up
Mm-hmm.
one day and suddenly, um, other groups of people are going to be gone, right? In terms of
Mm-hmm.
their presence in public discourse. So that's why I wanted to think about identity erasure and kind of bring that to the forefront as you think about some of these ongoing
Mm-hmm.
political and cultural discussions that
Yeah.
are being had.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love what you're mentioning there about the slow covert ways in which things start to disappear. And I often wonder, for some of them, interestingly enough, let's be as loud as we were about getting it as we are about removing it and see who resists, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, it does happen slowly, but you're like, oh, I didn't even notice it. It kind of reminds me, Lisa, of like when someone gets a haircut or some small feature changes, it's big to them, but if you
Yes.
just show up, do you pick up on it or not? When I was a child and my mom would come in with a new hairstyle, it's like, let's see if anybody noticed.
Yes.
I walked in with the new hairstyle. But it feels similar to that as I wonder if anybody's going to notice that we just take off this
Yep.
land acknowledgement off the side of this building. Let's just see if anybody notices that.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yep. 100%.
yeah. All right. Well, that takes us directly into phase one. And phase one is interesting because I have to recall back to 2020 when there was obviously a lot going on with or without a pandemic. We had a lot going on. We had George Floyd going on. We had of course, Black Lives Matter movement was happening at that time. A number of different things were occurring in 2020, regardless of a pandemic or not. And there are many cities that I've noticed, and I love paying attention to uh, art being activism, if you will. Like it's hard to go a
Mm-hmm.
couple of blocks in DC without seeing some form of art, whether it's a mural or otherwise. I have a picture that's on my social media where I'm standing in front of a huge mural of Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg in Annapolis, because in Maryland, we are very heavy on the African American prolific presence,
Mm-hmm.
including here at Tubman and lots of others. Philadelphia as well, they have a big mural culture there. And so now that we realize that the Black Lives Matter block in DC is starting to be removed, we have a new and interesting conversation, right? Very interesting conversation. So let me give you the skinny and you let me know what you think, Lisa. But what we know
Okay.
about this is that the mural is very close to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just keep that percolating in the back of your mind, Lisa.
Okay.
It's very close to the White House. And so Mayor Muriel Bowser announced that there would be the removal of the Black Lives Matter block. And part of that was, in my personal opinion, in response to threats from the current
Hmm.
president of the United States to defund many things that affect DC proper.
Mm-hmm.
I really feel that, in my opinion, I don't think that it was meant to be permanent from the beginning as much as I would love for it to be. Because if you're calling it a mural, usually when it comes to art, murals, sculptures, and otherwise are installed for a period of time, and then it may change location or something else may occur. And so, of course, when you're a few, a bit away from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House, and you have a Black Lives Matter mural connecting you to individuals who have strongly encouraged the entire country to speak of anti-DEI issues, has not had any voice when it comes to anti-racism concerns, and is very flippant about the death of George Floyd and other violence against Black people. Aren't we surprised that there was a threat, number one? Because, of course, when you have this around, that makes the most implicated folks uncomfortable. So it's almost like
Mm-hmm.
looking in a mirror every day going to work
Yeah.
at 100. Um, and so, on one hand, if we're treating it as simply art, we should know that yes, art moves around. But on the other hand, look at where the art is being installed. Look
Mm.
at who it makes uncomfortable. Look at who is very upset by it. Look at what the reminders of it are, because at that time, as many of us know, the Black Lives Matter area of DC encouraged active, and unfortunately, I have to say legal, active and legal protest at the time
Yep.
when it
Yep.
comes to racial issues. And so when you have a president that has been all those things, and on top of that, has attempted to get rid of legally sanctioned protest, why again would we be surprised? Why? It's been named as a distraction. Black Lives Matter Plaza has been named as a distraction for some folks, and I think that is white fragility for discomfort for those that are unwilling to face the realities of race in this country. So, calling it a quote unquote waste of resources and then threatening a Black mayor in an overwhelming Black city, a Black city that has been blackety Black since 1960 census, you are making a statement about who matters and who does not. I can't say they're not off brand. They are on brand with who they are. And my only hope is that it is reinstalled elsewhere. But I hope that there is not a concession that is reinstalled after this presidential administration. That's where I am with it, because that would be very comfortable for many people. So, Lisa, what do you think about Black Lives Matter Plaza?
So are you saying that you hope it is just moved elsewhere versus in 4 years it comes back to the same place?
No, what I'm saying is that I really don't care where it is. I want it to be replaced immediately. I don't want us to wait until this presidential administration blows over, because that to me is a question of authenticity. It
Mm-hmm.
is, as a Black person, and for those that are native Washingtonians, I would be very, very careful to think about my Black mayor and what she really stands for if it did not come back immediately. If it waited until after Trump is out of office, that would be a huge concession for me. Not that I don't want it, but it would be a huge concession for me. Problematic.
So, so you're saying she should get it painted elsewhere in the city that is not visible from the White House?
Oh, I would be, no, let's go even more petty, Lisa. Let's go even more
Okay.
petty. Make it closer to the White House. Since you don't want it where it is, make it closer to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way the city is structured, there's almost no way to avoid seeing it. If it's somewhere in the vicinity of the
Right.
White House, there's almost no way. Because again, if you think about Secret Service, if you think about all the different routes in and out of the city that any president has to have, you're going to see it at some point. So
Mm-hmm.
move it. Move it. If you need to move it, then move it. Now, I would prefer, for if I had my druthers on my, list of preferences here, my first preference is don't fool with it, and we'll see how much courage you have as a mayor. That would be my first preference. But since you've
Okay.
already decided to move it, there's no reason why the same folks who are uncomfortable shouldn't see it elsewhere, because there's more than one route into the city and there's more than one route into the White House. Move it to another place where they will then see it. And let's just play a game of cat and mouse to see how many resources you want to burn up moving a mural that speaks to the Blackness of a city and historical Black references, and really see what you mean by government waste. Because you're now speaking to the District of Columbia, that you are forcing to waste resources with the threat that you won't give them more.
Mm-hmm.
That's dictatorship. And so I want to see where a Black female mayor takes deference to that. So let's
It's a
test our metal and see where that goes.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard place for her to be, though, don't you think?
Oh, it is. It is very much so. It is. But I mean, it's going to be hard anyway. I mean, I of all the municipalities to be mayor of, DC is not easy no matter who's in the White House.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in this particular case, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's this recurring theme that you and I had come to nearly every episode
Mm-hmm,
now is
mm-hmm,
what
mm-hmm.
room do you have to push back? What does that look like? What are the consequences of that? Are they personal
Right.
consequences? Are they
Mm-hmm.
bigger public consequences?
And I
This
think that's
feels,
where it plays out. I think that's
yeah.
exactly where it plays out, though, is that given the Blackness of the city, given the history of the city, it is somewhat of a no-win situation if 4547 really does flex his muscle around the funding piece of things. It's you either get it seems very similar to what we've talked about around funding in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when we talked about, do we get rid of programs because it threatens the federal funding that supports the very same folks that the programs
Right.
support? Or are we loud about the programming and lose the funding, and then we have a lose-lose situation? I think it's very similar in DC. It's,
Yeah.
you lose popular opinion because you need the funding to support the very populace that's going to critique you? Or do you win the popular demand and then you have a political life beyond this administration?
Yeah. I mean,
Because people will
DC,
not forget it. I don't care what you run for. People will not forget bending
they
the knee to him.
true. But I do hope that people will have some kind of a nuanced critique of this action to remove the mural. I mean, DC doesn't have statehood, right? But it has like 700,000 people or something. I know some enormous, it's like bigger than several states, right? The population.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
and so it doesn't have a lot of power like Maine, right? When the Maine
Mhm.
governor was like, well, I'll see you in court, right? But it's just, it's
I
not,
love that. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
not the same.
Mhm.
So I was disappointed to see that it was being erased. I don't believe it's going to be put somewhere else. I think it's just gone. Um, but I also think it's an impossible decision. Like it's an impossible,
Oh yeah. Oh
like
yeah. Definitely.
there's not a good answer for her, right?
Mhm.
And it's just particularly painful that she's a Black woman who is being put in
Mhm.
this position. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a watch this space, right? To your kind of based on how you're analyzing the situation. I guess time will tell, but I don't know. I'm not feeling confident that she's going to push back.
No, no, I'm not feeling confident that she's going to push back. But again, I don't live in DC, so DC proper, so I can't vote for or against anything that she is doing. But given that DC, people forget all the time geography, that we call it the DMV for that very reason. You can literally run through Maryland, DC, and Virginia in the blink of an eye, because whether you're going to work or what have you. And so, given that, there is judgment coming from all different directions with that, because what happens in DC affects so many other people's lives, including their work lives. Of course, federal employees that may live in, whether it's Maryland, whether it's Virginia, whether it's Pennsylvania, and they commute in. All of that is affected by what happens in DC. So yes, in an impossible situation, yet at the same time, having such a deep history of Blackness, having such a deep history of Black mayors
Yeah.
in DC. I mean, you go all the way back to, Walter Washington and Marion Barry, and then you bring it on forward. Oh Lord. I mean, it is a long history. And so it's kind of like you almost feel like, am I going to be the one? And if you're saying, am I going to be the one? Yeah, the
Mm,
level of critique is beyond fair.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Beyond fair.
All
So,
right. Well, with that,
mhm.
let's move into phase two, which is also not super uplifting.
Right, exactly. We're not good at that, Lisa. We're not good at that.
So, in recent weeks, the Supreme Court of the United States has agreed to hear a case out of Colorado again. I don't know what the deal is with Colorado. I mean, in some ways, I think you said it off air, Shaunna, that in some ways Colorado is really out front, and in other ways, not so much. So, um, we have yet another Coloradan who has challenged a Colorado law that prohibits just it's broadly prohibiting discrimination against LGBT QIA plus folks, but it's specifically around conversion therapy. So conversion therapy, for those who don't know, is a therapeutic intervention with LGBT folks to essentially convert them back to heterosexuality or being identifying as cisgender, right? So this idea that to be gay, to be transgender is an aberration, is wrong, is not normal, is not right. And so we just need to have you go to therapy and you'll see the light of day and you'll get back to doing it properly, right? Um, as you can probably infer, it's incredibly harmful and demoralizing and identity erasure, right?
Absolutely.
And
Hmm.
just it's cruel. Um, there's a lot of words that I could use to describe it anyway. So this therapist in Colorado is challenging this ban. There are about 20 states that ban conversion therapy, and Colorado is one of them. And she's disputing it on the basis of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, that it is limiting or interfering with those two constitutionally protected rights. But the Supreme Court has accepted the freedom of speech piece of this. So freedom of religion is not going to be part of the case. It is going to be a First Amendment freedom of speech challenge only. And lo and behold, the entity that is the vehicle by which this is being challenged legally is Alliance Defending Freedom. And so that name might be familiar to some because it is the same group that represented the web designer in 303 Creative, a case from a couple of years ago where the court ruled that you cannot hold someone legally responsible for discriminating against the LGBT community because designing websites is creative. Blah, blah, blah. You can look it up. There's a lot more to it, but it's very irritating because this particular web designer hadn't even been asked to design a website for a gay couple, right? So it was like totally a speculative case that shouldn't even have gone to the Supreme Court. And then before that, you might remember there was the baker that didn't want to make a wedding cake
The cake.
for a gay couple. Yes. And obviously the Supreme Court found, I think on a technicality there, they found in their favor. So this is number 3 when it comes to having the freedom to be a vendor, to participate, in discrimination. Alliance Defending Freedom was also involved in the Dobbs case that overturned Roe versus Wade, and a California case that ended up allowing pregnancy crisis centers, not requiring them to tell people about abortion options. So this group is a monster when it comes to developing laws around, challenging laws that are protective of LGBTQIA plus people's rights, constitutional and otherwise. So I am very disappointed in Colorado, and this is going to get heard this session. So at some point it'll come in front of the court, and then decision will likely come down in June, probably, of 2026. But Shaunna, what are your thoughts on this wonderful event that has come to our attention?
Yeah. Well, and what a few things that I heard that I think are important to really stress too is, conversion therapy. When I first learned about it, the very first things that I heard, of course, because my dissertation was around such topics, but specifically around how this has been a method that's been discredited and condemned by major medical, psychological organizations due to any empirical data that it works, and plenty of empirical data of its harm. And so I want to name that for those that are like, wait a minute, this is new to me. I hadn't heard of it before. There's so many harmful effects, the depression, anxiety, the self-esteem issues, of course, suicidal ideation, a lot of the aspects of the lived experiences already for these particular groups amplified as a result, because the premise is that being LGBTQ plus is quote unquote a disorder that needs to be fixed. That's the premise of conversion therapy, is that Lisa, something is wrong with you. Shaunna, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with the individual. And so let's convert you back to rightness, correctness, healed, fixed. And so with that, that is a major problem that medical and mental health folks are always combating against, that something's wrong with an individual. And actually, that's not the case. So if there's nothing to fix, then there's no need to have a process of fixing, if you will. And so given that, that's one thing. But the second thing, let's be clear, y'all, for everybody, even those that are only casually interested in Roe v. Wade, the mere fact that the majority of us thought that there was a percentage of a percentage of a percentage that Roe v. Wade would ever be overturned, and it was by this exact group, should tell you enough about its power, the amount of money that they have in their pockets, the amount of attorneys that they have, and not to take Alliance lightly in any way, shape, or form. Take them very seriously. They are dangerous when it comes to this work. And I would also suggest, Lisa, that when it comes to this work, I'm trying to, I don't even want to go there when it comes to the equivalency of anyone's identity being erased or removed. But what I will
Mhm.
say is that when it comes to these types of cases that can set a precedent, this
Mhm.
again goes back to what we talked about, Lisa, before, where things slowly but surely get removed. It's
Yeah.
like this
Yeah.
slippery slope that happens. This feels that way where, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to this one case because, it's just this one person that's talking about freedom of speech. And then all of a sudden you look around
Right.
and every LGBTQ plus person around you is being labeled as a disorder that needs to be fixed. That's
Yeah.
where we're going. That's not being hyperbolic. That is exactly what has occurred with other issues that Alliance has addressed. And so I just want to make sure that we're taking this seriously enough to pay attention.
Mhm.
And going back to what we've already said before, Lisa, and I don't mind being a broken record on this, we might want to even put this in our show notes of think about again, Alliance has what, over 3,000 attorneys that are willing to go to war around this topic. Make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is to support
Right.
those attorneys and those organizations like Lambda Legal and the Williams Center and other organizations that will legally support your values.
Mhm.
Don't just sit back and say, "Ooh, I can't wait to see the attorneys duke it out." This is no, this is not entertainment. This is people's lives. And so with
Yep.
that, put your money where your mouth is and make sure that you donate to support those attorneys that are fighting the good fight in response to, because again, we've been talking about resistance a lot, Lisa, for for the last few weeks or so. And so that for those of us who sit back and kind of wonder, oh goodness, well, I may be only an ally and what can I do? That's what you can do. That's what you can do.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And the state of Colorado has responded to the appeal, and they have said that the First Amendment allows states to reasonably regulate professional conduct to protect patients
Mm-hmm.
from substandard treatment, even when that regulation incidentally burdens speech. Right. So that substandard treatment is what you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. Is that
Incidentally.
there's no basis where this particular treatment style is effective and it is just harmful. And
Mm-hmm.
what I most worry about with conversion therapy is young people, right? So certainly conversion therapy is a risk for folks no matter their age group, but young people who might still be living with family members who are disapproving or
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
supportive
That's right.
of them identifying as LGBTQIA plus, right, are then pushing their kids into conversion therapy. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
creating harm and damage to young people whose brain is not fully developed. We know that suicide rates are
Yeah.
really high, particularly among trans youth, right? And so it's just going
Mm-hmm.
to exacerbate this um, situation. So
Mm-hmm.
I think your
Mm-hmm.
call to action there, Shaunna, is really important for folks. This is not one to sit back on because there has been a
That's right.
retrenchment of rights for LGBTQIA plus people in the
Mm-hmm.
last decade, and it is getting worse. And so
Mm-hmm.
we, as allies, as members of the community, have to stand up and have to educate, right? Tell people that
Mm-hmm.
this case is happening. Um,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it will have effects for the whole country if they find this Colorado
Absolutely.
is unconstitutional.
Absolutely. And I'll just mention just very briefly that so my oldest son Trey is in eighth grade, rising to ninth grade, has a very, very close friend who's transitioning, has had lots of mental health issues and concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and this would directly affect them were they not in the state of Maryland. Maryland, I
Yeah.
feel a bit more confident about, but you know, I don't like seeing my son crying because his friend is not well
Yeah.
because of the stressors and the implications
Mm-hmm.
of this, even in a state where they don't support conversion therapy. So imagine doubly so in other states where just existing is dangerous.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
important to think about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's get into our next phase. So, Lisa, this is going to get interesting. So, phase three I don't know if this is going to be an uplift or a, I don't know what it's going to be exactly. But what I do know is that I would suggest that all of us are looking for at least some small anchor in a very volatile world right now,
Yep. Yep.
especially here in the United States, but even as the United States affects global implications. So,
Indeed.
given that, I really appreciated a visual that was created by Howard Consulting that is called it's concentric circles. And we can drop some of this in the show notes. Circles of concern, influence, and control, right? And the reason why I was grateful that you brought this to my attention, Lisa, is because I've heard this more than once. I've heard this amongst whom I would consider pretty powerful people in their realms of influence, stating that, it's kind of that posturing of I'm throwing my hands up because I don't know what to do. I don't feel
Right.
like I'm in control. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster with no safety belt and don't know where I'm going, don't nothing. We're just going 200 miles an hour and let's see where we land. And so with that, these concentric circles speak to a few things. There's some layers to it. The inner circle, if you can envision, and we'll drop this in the show notes. The inner circle are things that I can control. Okay. So maybe what I say to people or how I voted, my day-to-day behavior, actions, decisions, choices, what I do with my money, similar to what we mentioned in a previous phase here. Those are things that are in my realm of influence, things that I can control. But then the next concentric circle, things that I can influence. Now, this gets interesting, Lisa, because if I use the word influence pre-social media, it may feel different.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but things that I can influence. So maybe other people's actions or what other people think. My reputation amongst other people, who follows me on social media and maybe who doesn't follow me. Those types of things that I may be able to influence if I interject some information or whatever I can do to help influence a perspective or an action. And then we have that last circle on the outside that are things outside of my control. So, Lisa, we talked about Noah for like 2 or 3 different podcasts here, but we can't
Yeah.
control the weather.
Right.
We can't control government policy, so we think. Um, Here in the DMV area, we cannot control traffic. Okay. My mother asks me all the time, how long does it take you to get there? It depends on the time of day. Okay. Because traffic is real around here. Um, Even our previous episode on Kendrick Lamar and the Super Bowl, we have no influence control over the outcome of the Super Bowl, for example. And so with this, I appreciated this visual because I would suggest, Lisa, going back to a concept we talked about previously where Lily Zhang talks about 6 approaches to power. I think sometimes it becomes very comfortable for us to posit ourselves in ways that we have less control when we may actually have more, especially in political circles and arenas. And so, and I think it becomes a level of resistance. Like, Lisa, how many times have you and I worked on a project, or maybe you've worked on one without me, where you talk to probably the most senior leader or decision maker in an organization, and they feign lack of control? Well, I can't control
Yeah.
what X
Yeah.
person does, or I can't control what the state does. I mean, I'm working with a client right now that's saying that. I'm thinking, you don't have direct control, but you do have influence. So why don't we use that instead of just throwing up our hands and doing
Right.
nothing, right? And so, Lisa, I'm wondering where this whole circles of concern, influence, and control, how that lands on you, because I realize I already know that I have a soapbox of intentionality. Like, it irritates me when people say they don't have control over certain things. Because I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, just keep driving that Formula One car with your foot on the gas at 200 miles an hour with no steering wheel. Go ahead. I'm going to at least try to get a steering wheel. I'm just wondering how that lands on you, that whole control, influence, concern, even feigned lack of power. How does that land on you?
Yeah. I mean, so this was designed by this consultant to help people, I think, stay grounded, right? Like you can't control everything. So what can you control? And that's not a new concept per se, but the thing that jumped out to me here was that with the government policy being in that last circle of being an area of concern but out of your control, I'm like, absolutely not. Government policy is not out of your control, which is kind of what you're speaking to with the folks that you're connected with who are throwing their hands up and saying, well, there's nothing I can do. There's everything that you can do. That's part of what it means to be a democracy, right? Is you call your representative, you vote for someone different, you donate to funds or to organizations that are at the Capitol that are pushing senators and representatives to do different things. Like, yes, you absolutely have influence and to some degree control over government policy. And I think it's really easy right now because of the fire hose of ridiculousness to just say it's too much. I'm concerned about it, but I don't have any control over it, right? Like I'm not going to get that steering wheel for the Formula One car. I'm just going to let it take me where it takes me. And I think that that's a position of one, privilege, but also two, overwhelm, right? So a person who doesn't have a lot of privilege could be overwhelmed to the point of inaction. So it's not just about privilege, but I think people with privilege who are least impacted by the ridiculousness are the ones that are more likely to say nothing I can do, right? It is what it is.
Oh yeah.
And then say, well, that's just how I stay grounded. Like I'm just not going to watch the news. And I feel I have really mixed feelings about it because I do think that we need to take care of ourselves. And I am like a news junkie. I'm on it way too much. Like I am reading about everything all of the time, right? Like I probably take it to an extreme. And so that probably does impact my mental health. So, but to say I'm just going to switch off, if you have the capacity and ability to pay attention to current events, then you should be paying attention to current events. It doesn't mean to say you have to sit on 24-hour cable news 24 hours a day, right? Because that's how you can be educated to then call your darn representative and say, what the heck are you doing? You know? So I think, I have mixed feelings about it, I guess. And its association with staying grounded. Because for me, being grounded is knowing what is going on, right? Like knowing and thinking critically about the ongoing ripples of impact that a certain thing will do. Like that's how I can stay grounded, by feeling educated about something. Like my groundedness doesn't derive from ignorance, right? And I don't mean ignorance in a derogatory way. I mean like ignorance, not knowing.
Just not being aware. Yeah, exactly. No. And that's where it is different for many people, because truly ignorance is bliss for a lot of people. And they feel comfort and safety in not knowing what can affect their lives. I mean, I have a couple people that are pretty close to me where I'm like, it could be something as simple as knowing, there's a holiday next week, and they're like, huh? What? Yeah, there's a federal holiday that happens every week, every year that, you're just not aware of, things that, and there's a level of comfort to that. And I always wonder, is it a level of comfort, or I know this sounds so foo-foo, Lisa, but I do feel like certain folks vibrate at a certain level of information where others don't, right? And I don't know if that's, and I don't think that's connected to formal education necessarily either. I just think that, like, for example, my parents, I would say, are high vibrational on news and information. Number one, because they have the time to, and number two, because they're getting to an age and stage in their lives where they care what's affecting them, me, and their grandchildren. And so they vibrate on a different level where they are almost insatiable when it comes to information and news. There are other folks that are like, look, I'm already in the trenches. I'm in the trenches right now. I don't want to know or see what's going on because I've got these other battles I'm facing. So I have to vibrate on a different level because I'm fighting the day-to-day battles while y'all are doing the news on the wars, almost
Mm-hmm.
quite literally. And so given that they can't, and so I'm always like trying to rein in my judgment on the, to your very point, the ignorance of, some of it is feigned ignorance, some of it is very intentional ignorance as a form of resistance. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's others that I do have empathy for, that they are fighting such big fights. Like I'm not expecting, my friend that's in the middle of chemo right now to really care what somebody said about a Tesla last week.
Right.
I don't want you to care about that. I want you to smile. I want you to have fun. I want you to, wear your brightest clothing while you're on your way to chemo. And I hope you feel great when you leave. I don't want you to vibrate on the level of having to think about other things that I would consider myself having space to think about. Um, so I think the people that we have the most problem with, Lisa, are the people that do have space
Yeah.
to know and care, and they choose not to because that relieves them of the responsibility of responding to it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you said. I think that it is individual, and so that's why I struggle a little bit with these kind of images or recommendations about how
Hmm.
to stay grounded. Where do you have influence? I think at a high level, I agree. Right, you can't
Yes.
control everything. So what are your spheres of influence? But I do think it's so individual, and um, it actually would cause me more anxiety to not pay attention to the news than it would to pay attention to the news, right? And then
Mm,
to your friend who's going through chemo, if they want to pay attention to the news while going through chemo, then have at it, right? Like I get what you're saying, and it's also that individual piece around what is grounding to someone
yes, yes, yes.
is not grounding to someone else. And I think that's where we get into this right now, because everyone is in, it's in such a state of disarray, and we're trying to
Yes.
grab, where do I have control? Where do I have influence? Where am I concerned?
Mm-hmm.
How do I stay
Mm-hmm.
grounded? Right. And it's like, have a
Yeah.
cup of tea. Okay. That's not going to do it. But, so
Yes,
I
yes,
guess I
yes,
don't know if
yes.
I'm talking a little bit in circles here. I think that we do each need to find a strategy that grounds us, but that
Mm-hmm.
grounding strategy isn't necessarily, as with your parents and me, apparently, right? Isn't necessarily disconnecting from the information flow. It could be limiting it a little bit, but it isn't disconnecting from it, right?
Yeah, yeah, I would strongly suggest not disconnecting totally. But, like I have a friend of mine who went through and does this each year actually during Lent, where they solely focus on, I have 1 hour of social media a day, and
Mm,
that's it. And anything that's not related to their job, they don't let it come across their screen. They even change their filters on news and information and searches so that it only gives them
mm,
what they need for their job. But otherwise, they have 1 hour, scroll, scroll, scroll. Okay, good, I'm done. Because an hour, especially if you're talking about things like, okay, I am now in the doom scroll and I have been scrolling and I did not realize until I looked up it's been 4 hours and I've been scrolling over news. Oh my word. I think that does make us more conscious of what we take in and what we don't. But depending on the person, like I'm imagining a low vibrational person taking in an hour and being like, oh, this is too much. I'm shutting this down in 15 minutes.
mm-hmm,
But a high vibrational intellect person like yourself or my parents would be like, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what I know is going on out there. I feel even more disoriented because I only got a quick snapshot of what I would like to have a deep dive in to make me feel better. So I do think it's very individual. I think you're right. It's very individual. And so the key now is be intentional about your strategy around that.
yeah,
What are
yeah.
you going to take in? What are you not going to take in? Um, I love when Lisa keeps me up to speed on what's going on in the world, but I also know that maybe sometime I need to respond the next day because of maybe something that popped off in my day that day where, yes, I definitely want to know and talk about it, but now might not be the time for me and my
Mm-hmm,
vibration.
mm-hmm.
Whatever,
Yeah.
whatever's your nuance, find your nuance and don't be shy about it.
And that's what you can control, right? So that's that center circle on this diagram, is that's what
Yes.
you can control. And it's not, but it's not,
Yes.
don't think that you have no influence or no control over
That's
everything, but
right.
also things like the weather, you generally don't have control over,
That's
right?
right.
So, like
Mm-hmm.
getting angry that there's a snowstorm on a day that you wanted to do something may not be, I get it, but it may not be the best use of your energy.
That's right. That's right.
So
Exactly.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's some utility to this, but I think in the course of our conversation, I have come around to believing that I'm not sure this is that helpful for me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, I was thinking about you made me laugh when you were talking about self-care, like even, going to the gym or what have you. How many times have I gone to the gym? I got on whatever cardio machine that I was going to get on, and I look up and every single news channel is on. So the very thing that I was trying to escape was right there. I said, forget it.
Yep.
Got
Yep.
off the treadmill, went into like a spin class just to go spin on the bike to get away from the
Yep.
TVs because my intention was completely obliterated because someone else felt that it was important to know what was going on in the midst of my piece. I'm like, oh Lord. So yeah, I do think it has to be intentional, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. I'm not sure that we agree with these concentric circles, but here's the key, Lisa. People may want to take a look at this visual and tweak it for their own use. What would you put in
100%.
those
Yeah.
circles,
Yeah.
right? What would you put in those circles that work for you and it doesn't have to work for anyone else, and run with that for
Mm-hmm.
possibly the next 4 years? Just
Right.
saying.
Right. Right. All right.
Oh, all right. Well, look, we're at the end of yet another week. Grateful for our listeners. So it's a wrap here, but don't forget, we are always on YouTube under Unfazed Unedited. You can find us and subscribe there at Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please leave a review there as well, too. Give us lots of stars there. Instagram, Unfazed Podcast, LinkedIn at Unfazed Pod. Email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com. And of course, all things podcast are at our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can see all of our old shows that were endurance sports specific, all the way into our new shows that are all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you like this episode, please share it, leave a review, share this with your coworkers, friends, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next time.
See you next time.